So, recently Netflix released an animated miniseries called Maya and the Three. I was so happy when I first found out about this. I mean, it's a story inspired by the culture and mythology of pre-Hispanic Mesoamerica, amongst other Latin places. That's like my whole thing. And until recent years with shows like Victor and Valentino and Onyx Equinox, there were very few stories that actually got it right. Before, the only thing people thought about when they heard Aztec or Maya were the pyramids, sacrifices, and the whole stupid 2012 thing, which I really don't want to get into right now, just because I value my mental health. But seeing things like this, I haven't been this excited about something in a long while. And after watching all 9 episodes, I can tell you that it's probably my favorite thing to come out this year. For those of you that haven't seen it yet or are unsure that it's worthy of your time, let me assure you that they went all out with this series. The animation is beautiful and fight scenes are so cool and pretty and everything about it is just so cool. And if the art style looks familiar, it should, cause this show is literally from the same creators as The Book of Life and the Nickelodeon show El Tigre. Those were classic staples in my little Mexican American childhood. Before Disney Pixar's Coco and recent growth and interest in these kind of stories, there was only a handful of Latin representation on screen, and those two were pioneers in that regard. And while the art excels in 2D with all the wacky proportions, they really do know how to take advantage of the 3D spaces and make it work at its best. But you can really tell that they got all that Netflix money with the amazing cast of actors. And of course, any good show has to have a good story, and this definitely does. The basic premise being that Princess Maya of the fictional kingdom of Tekka has to travel to other kingdoms to find the warriors of an ancient prophecy, to stop the gods of the underworld who are inspired by real-world Mesoamerican mythology from destroying humanity. And that's what really sold me on this. I've gotta admit that at first, I was kinda disappointed that they didn't try to make it too historically accurate, but instead take place in a fictional world with fictional kingdoms. But after watching the first episode, all my worries disappeared. The creator himself, Jorge R. Gutierrez, oh gosh, my accent is so bad. The creator himself, Jorge Gutierrez, saying that while he wanted to use all sorts of inspiration from Latin and pre-Columbian cultures, I can definitely see the desire to want to have your own creative liberties. And as much of a major history and mythology nerd that I am, I still think it absolutely works. I mean, hey, fantasy stories do it all the time with European-inspired worlds like Lord of the Rings, or like Avatar: The Last Airbender with Asian and Inuit cultures. So why would this be any different? So for the rest of the video, I'm going to be briefly talking about a lot of the locations and characters that appear throughout the show, especially with our 4 main heroes and most of the gods. I won't be talking about a lot of spoiler stuff today, so don't worry about that. But if you want to go in completely blind into this series, then by all means, go ahead, click off the video, watch the show. It's only 9 episodes, it's great. Come back here, and we'll have a fun time. And for everyone else, let's just get into it. So, despite being a fictional setting like I said earlier, each of the 4 kingdoms our protagonists ventures into are inspired by different cultures. The first one we're introduced to being the kingdom of Tekka, which is just straight up the Aztec capital city of Tenochtitlan, home to the Mexica tribe. Just look at the iconic pyramid that towers over the rest of the city with the 2 temples sitting on top. Plus the city is built in the middle of a lake and in the shape of an eagle. Man, there's just so many references like the ball game and the eagle on the cactus, and not to mention all the Nahuatl symbols and Aztec designs everywhere. There's just so much detail in here, and I can't talk about all of it because this video will be forever. And this is all literally just in the first 5 minutes. Also, I've already covered some of this stuff in my other Mesoamerican videos, so like why don't you subscribe or something? I don't know. Other locations in the show involve Luna Island, the Jungle Kingdom, and the Golden Mountains Kingdom, all of which also have real-world connections. Luna Island being inspired by Caribbean culture, which was a really cool addition, so I was really happy to see it make an appearance. Not to mention one of the characters that joined Maya's team, Rico, is not only really fun, but his stutter plays an integral part in his character. They even went out of their way to hire a speech coach to help out, which as someone who's always had trouble with speaking, I highly appreciate the thought that went into this. Super cool. Next is the Jungle Kingdom, which is obviously inspired by Mayan culture. From what I can tell, the Jungle Kingdom looks very similar to the ancient city of Tikal in Guatemala, with maybe a hint of Chichen Itza in there for good measure. The member who joins from here is Chimi, who has a super cool design with face paint that's very reminiscent of the Day of the Dead. Also, it's extremely crucial that I point this out, that she was raised by monkeys, which in Spanish is either chango or changa, and that literally makes her, wait for it, a chimichanga. Yeah, after someone pointed that out to me, I could not take her name seriously for the rest of the show, so you're welcome for that. The final kingdom they visit is the Golden Mountains Kingdom, which, seen from the farming terraces, the puma and sun iconography, I can conclude that this is heavily inspired by the Inca culture found in the Andean mountains of Peru, along with many other countries. And of course the warrior they pick up from here is literally named Pichu, as in the most well-known Incan ruins of Machu Picchu. So yeah, there's lots of cool representation in all these cultures, and a cast of heroes. But where there's heroes, there's also villains, which is where the really fun part begins. The gods of the underworld. The first god we meet is Pretty Boy Zatz, who just so happens to be accompanied by some Olmec-like golems. Nice touch there. Zatz and his father Kamazotz are both bat gods, with bats quite frequently appearing in Mesoamerican folklore as symbols of death. In the Mayan creation story of the Popol Vuh, the hero twins had to survive a night in the bat house. And in the later part of the Popol Vuh, the first ever humans had a run-in with the bat-winged messenger of the underworld, which just so happens to be Zatz's role when we're first introduced to him. Zatz's girlfriend, a cat goddess of tattoos, was a little harder to figure out, and by little I mean very much so. Tattooing was an important part of Mayan culture. People attribute her to steadying the hands of those who perform the act of inking. However, the only credible source I could really find about her is tucked away in a scholarly book that I don't have access to, so that's fun. That's the thing about researching gods and mythology, especially the Mesoamerican kind. Because of the combination of a lack of written records and colonial Spaniards being colonial Spaniards, things kinda get lost over time, and those that remain are kind of harder to track down. So if anyone has any more information about her and are willing to put it in the comment section below, that would be greatly appreciated. I really want to learn more about her. Either way, the fight scene between Akkad and Maya is so freaking cool. Just look at it. It's beautiful. Next are probably my two favorite characters in the entire series, and that being of course the king and queen of the underworld. Of course I'm talking about Lord Mictlan and Lady Micte, who unlike most of the other gods are actually Aztec in origin. Lord Mictlan being Mictlantecutli, which in the Aztec language of Nahuatl literally just means the Lord of Mictlan, or the Lord of the Underworld. Just like how Lady Micte is Mictlantecuhtli, or the Lady of Death. Oh yeah, by the way, instead of being the god of war, Mictlantecutli is actually the god of death in Aztec mythology, which explains why he spends most of his time in the underworld. Although it is kind of romantic in a weird twisted sort of way with how the god of war is married to the goddess of death. Two things that go together quite nicely. Speaking of nice things, these guys probably have my favorite designs in the entire show. They're so over the top and wacky, I just can't get enough of it. Lord Mictlan has this cool two-faced thing going on with him, which is most likely a reference to how the lords of the Mayan underworld, Xibaba, no, not that one, how the lords of the underworld Xibaba tend to come in twos, with the main rulers being Hun Kame and Vukub Kame, or One Death and Seven Death. And then there's my gal Lady Micte. I mean, just look at her. What's with the Gutierrez cinematic universe and super cool and beautiful death goddesses? And don't even get me started on the design for Mictlantecuhtli no next equinox. Like, it's just too much to handle. Why are they so pretty? Keep in mind that I'm usually not into women like that very often. But when it comes to Aztec death goddesses, there's something about them. I don't know.
What is it with Mexicans and
beautiful death goddesses?
Okay, where was I? Mictlantecuhtli in the myths is tasked with guarding the bones of the dead for her husband. And it may be possible that she was the inspiration for the modern Catrina character, created by Guadalupe Posada, and has become a major symbol for the Day of the Dead in modern days. Although whether this is true or not, only Posada himself would know. And if not, then it would make sense that Lady Micte and the Book of Life character, La Muerte, are separate characters, as seen by her cameo in Lady Micte's wedding flashback. Nice touch. The next pair of gods we meet actually have a very well documented origin, that being Cabra Khan, the god of earthquakes, and his wife Cipacli, the goddess of alligators. Anyone who's familiar with the Popol Vuh will recognize these two, as after the hero twins defeat the false king Seva Macaw, who is also referenced in the show, the hero twins then take down his son, Cipacna and Cabra Khan. Cabra Khan of course being Cabra Khan from the story. However, Cipacli is a little different, as instead of being Cabra Khan's brother Cipacna, she instead shares the name of the Aztec alligator beast, who the gods killed to create the world with her corpse, and whose many mouths still wish to devour. Man, the amount of times that I've referenced Cipacli in my videos is more than I would have thought. And by the way, I did not recognize that Cipacli wasn't Cipacna until the very last episode of the series. just because of how perfectly she fits into the role of a scary alligator god. But the multiple mouths do make sense now. There's also a bunch of other small details throughout, and not just in their fight scene, but in many others, that link to their mythological origins, like the pit, which represents how Capricorn and Zipagna are defeated in the Popol Vuh. I guess spoilers for a story that's probably been around for 3,000 years? Huda and Khan, the gods of wind and storms, were very interesting to me. Immediately, I recognized them as the singular god, Huda Khan, again from the Popol Vuh, and who is seen in many other forms all over Mesoamerica. But what I couldn't understand was why they split him into two separate people. At first I thought it was just an aesthetic choice, but then I did some digging and fell down a rabbit hole so deep I might make this topic a whole separate video. But in short, Huda Khan is a sky deity, and as being the origin for the English word hurricane, he, like his two sons, are often associated with things like lightning, rain, and storms. He is such an important deity that it makes sense that, like his co-creator, the feathered serpent, he appears all over Mesoamerica in several different forms, either due to the idea of him just spreading around, or because of synchronization with existing deities among neighboring civilizations. The speakers of the Sierra Popoluca language have not only a hurricane god, but also a separate thunder god, rather than just having them be one singular being. Surprisingly, the separating of Hudu and Khan make a lot more sense mythologically than I originally thought. Also, Huda Khan means one-legged, and he's often depicted as having a serpent replace it. So there's that. And then there's Chival, whose name literally just means goat in Spanish, and comes from the folklore character of the Way Chival. The word Way or Wayub meaning a person who can transform into an animal that they have a deep spiritual connection through. This transformation often happens during sleep, which is actually just what the word Wayub means. Although goats weren't introduced to the New World until the Spanish, the idea of Wayubs or Nahuas, as called by the speakers of the Nahuatl language, are all over Mesoamerica, and go back as far as the Olmecs, with the so-called were-jaguars. Along with Chival are a bunch of other gods, including Bone and Skull, the goddesses of thievery. And I could not stop smiling every time they made an appearance. Skull wears conquistador armor, along with the famous hat, while Bone has a cool pirate getup. Of course, both pirates and conquistadors have a very complicated history with the Americas, and because of that, they're all about stealing that sweet sweet gold. As soon as I saw their designs, I was pretty sure this was just the creator's way of having a fight scene with cool sword fighting skeletons, since we only got a teaser of something similar with the revolutionary twins in the Book of Life.
And we won.
And I'm absolutely in love with it. I've been waiting 7 years for a fight scene like this, and it did not disappoint. So in short, they're cool, and that's that. The next god was pretty recognizable for me. He's a golden bird with jeweled eyes, and his name is Vukub, meaning 7. This is of course a reference to Vukub Kakix, or Seven Macaw, the father of Cabrican and Zipagna from earlier, and poser as the sun and moon thanks to his jeweled eyes and teeth. Although Seven Macaw isn't a cool jungle animal god like Vukub is from the show, he's still a pretty interesting character, and I like this one. The last god in this evil friend group is Ixtabe, the goddess of illusion. Now, I knew that this was gonna give me a hard time during the research phase. Her name shares similarities to the goddess Ixtab, although who exactly Ixtab was and what she was the goddess of is pretty debated. While her situation is interesting, I won't be going into too much detail about her in this video, as she is usually associated with topics that could be seriously triggering for some people, so I won't be talking about it. Oh, by the way, there are crisis lines and links to resources for those who are struggling with mental health, so feel free to check them out in the description below. But going back to Ixtabe, her story is pretty well known amongst the modern Maya. According to the myth, Ixtabe lures men who are drunk or looking to cheat on their wives, and if the man falls prey to them, they are fated with death, because of course they are, which I guess the goddess of illusion part makes sense in the show, especially with how she uses her abilities. Interestingly enough, the story of Ixtabe is very similar to other myths all over Mexico and Central America, with legends like La Llorona, La Sifonaba, or even El Sombreron, where the gender assigned roles are reversed than those found in the Ixtabe story. All in all, there is a really cool cast of characters in the show, both human and gods, from all over the Americas, including certain cultures that don't get as much recognition as they should. I had a lot of fun with this show, and just as much fun learning about the gods like Ixtabe and various depictions of Huda Khan, along with characters that I'm not too familiar with. And even the gods that didn't physically show up in the show, like the feathered serpent, was absolutely everywhere in terms of design and architecture. It's just look at him, he's everywhere. And I think that's really cool. And despite being a fictional setting, they really did their research on this. There are so many historical and mythological references that I had to delete entire paragraphs from the script where I was just talking about the different colors on a single pyramid. Although if I did that, this video would be 20 hours long and there would still be stuff to talk about. I know I've said similar things about my Onyx Equinox video, but that's just because I find it so cool that we're finally getting stories like these. And seeing how well Maya and the 3 is doing on Netflix, I'm fairly confident that there will be similar stories to come. And I'll definitely be here talking about it. So maybe subscribe or something for when that happens, I don't know. Just think about it.